Well, good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on buying or selling a privately held business. My name is Kimberly Deas, and with my partner Bill Yankee, we work with business owners and professionals to transition businesses with Murphy Business and Financial Services. Now, both Bill and myself are previous business owners. We're very experienced in the ownership of business, and we really are champions of small business here in the local marketplace. So one of the questions that we often get asked is it a good time to buy or sell? So let's start by taking a quick look at the current economic situation in the Jacksonville market. Now, of course, across Florida this may vary, but here in Jacksonville there was recently a survey from the BMO Harris Bank that polled business owners and found that 96% of them expected their business to grow or to be stable. 92% of them expected the Florida economy to improve or be stable, and 80% expected the U.S. economy to improve or be stable. So if we analyze just the economy, there are many indicators that say the worst is over, and we have transitioned from an economic winter to an economic spring. Now, in the economic spring, buyers are more interested in buying. There is still hesitation, but they're not nearly as hesitant as in the economic winter. Also, the confidence level of buyers are increasing, and there's more activity in general. So from what we're looking at a bird's eye view, not only the local Jacksonville economy, but throughout Florida, it looks like we've got a supportive economic marketplace for supporting the buying and selling of businesses. So the next factor we're going to look at is the business sales trends overall. Last year, there was a 49% increase in business sales as reported by BizBuySell. Now, Curtis Croker of BizBuySell has come out publicly and said that after the onset of the Great Recession, transaction activity fell sharply until mid-2009 and then bumped along without meaningful growth. This created pent-up supply and demand that needed the right economy and capital conditions to materialize. Now, in 2013, those conditions finally came together, and it resulted in a large increase in business transactions and contributing to a healthier small business environment overall. So if we analyze the buying and selling, it seems that our buying and selling transactions have definitely jumped, and you'll see that from the chart here displayed that in 2013 we certainly saw a significant increase in sales quarter over quarter. Now, lastly, let's take a look at the business sale environment. Currently, we're seeing both a buyer and a seller market, and this is quite interesting. We're seeing in some areas where the buyers certainly are controlling the marketplace, and in other areas we're seeing a seller's market. And I'll just give you a quick example. I just recently listed a online printing company. They had great books. They had a clean business. We had 7 buyers begging to put in an offer. We had it under contract in 7 days from the listing. We had it closed in 30 days, and I still have buyers calling me asking if that business is for sale, and it's been closed for several months now. So the right business with well-organized books that's profitable, that has been run well, has certainly a value in the marketplace. And I will tell you there's a lot of commodity businesses out there, and I'll give you an example, restaurants. It's a buyer's market in many cases for restaurants because there's so many of them. And what I want you, if you're a seller in the line today, I want you to be aware the baby boomer bulge is coming. And what's happening right now is it's predicted over 10 million businesses will transition in the next 5 to 10 years. This could drastically devalue a business in the coming years due to the flooding of these businesses coming onto the market. Now, those considering selling should seriously consider the flood of these businesses and your timing to enter the market. If you enter the market when there's a ton of other businesses out there, you may find the value of your business is diminished over what you might have gotten had you sold a little bit earlier and then had the business a little bit more prepared. So let's take a look from a seller's perspective here for just a moment. A seller will most likely only do a deal like this once in your lifetime. And it's normal and natural to have a lot of questions. And you really only got one shot at doing this right. So selecting capable advisors really is crucial. In fact, Price Waterhouse, CPA firm, did a study, and they found out that 65% of business owners don't even know what their business is worth. 85% of owners have no exit strategy, and 75% of owners have the majority of their net worth tied up in their business. You are literally playing Russian roulette if you do not know what your business is worth, have a strategy, and have an exit plan in place. So with the majority of your net worth in your business, the sooner you start planning, the more likely you are to meet your financial goals and requirements. Exiting a business should be a well-planned event, not an unexpected call from a buyer. The more prepared your business is to sell, the higher the selling price and the more control you have when the time comes. Now, some sellers just wait for the phone to ring with the buyer and hope that that buyer is the right fit. Or worse, they plan to work forever, and an unexpected medical event or family event requires them to sell long before the business is ready, and they end up netting only a fraction of the value of the business. The earlier you start the process, the more options you have. And interestingly enough, the earlier you start, the more prepared your business is, and the more interested buyers are in your business. Now, for sellers, let's talk about the process real quick. The first step is making a commitment to have a plan in place. And of course, if you have minority partners, you have to make sure they're involved in the plan as well. Next, after you have a plan and you decide the timing is right to sell, is you need to determine the value of your business. And you may even want to consider doing that a little bit sooner so that you have a target to work with. I'm currently working with a business here in Jacksonville, and the owner is a very savvy individual, and she has come to me and asked to figure out what it's going to take to sell her business for $1 million in the next 3 years. And so we put a plan together, and over a monthly conference, every single month, I'm coaching and consulting with her to help her hit that $1 million number. Now, because she's got a target, a goal, and a time frame, we're able to get her there. Now, she may decide she doesn't want to sell when she gets there, and that's okay. But by having a plan and having a process in place, there's a much better chance that she's actually going to get that number than if she rolled the dice and hoped for it from the get-go. And it's okay. You can have a plan in place and not know when you're going to sell. That's acceptable. But at least have a plan in place and be working towards an exit, and then you can choose whether you exit or not. Some people, when we do this, they turn around and love their business again and choose not to exit for many, many years and sometimes decades to come, and that's okay. Once you have the value that you're looking to sell at, then you start looking for a buyer. Now, we hear the stories all the time. Somebody called me and they offered me $5 million for my business. But just because they called and offered doesn't necessarily mean, number one, that you're going to get that price, or number two, that they're the right buyer. And in fact, $5 million might be greatly undervaluing your business, depending on your business credentials. So the better strategy is to go ahead and list the business and let the buyers fight over you. When you've got one buyer and one seller, you're at the mercy of that buyer. When you have 5 buyers and one seller, you've got a lot more negotiating power. So we want to encourage you to we want to have as many buyers as possible in the process. Now, of course, we're going to make a complete disclosure about the business. And we do that through the offering memorandum. And that will outline your business, the good, the bad, and sometimes a little bit of the ugly, but we do make full disclosure on businesses. The next step is we want to support the value. And really what that is due diligence. So once the buyer's made an offer and you've agreed to that offer, then we go ahead and go into due diligence where the buyer will validate what the offer is based on. And we'll talk about that more in just a minute. And then the last step is closing the deal. So let's talk about why sellers sell. Because as a buyer, you want to understand why they're exiting. A lot of times, and we're hearing this right now, is burnout and retirement. Those are the 2 top reasons that we hear. And what's interesting is if you look at the cycle of a business between the 5-year and 7-year mark, that's when the majority of our sellers start to say, I'm ready to sell. They want to do something else. They're antsy. They want to try something else. So between the 5 and 7 mark. And then we start to see it at the 20-year mark, the 25-year mark, the 30-year mark, the 15-year mark. There's many different indicators, but between the 5 and 7 is a real sweet spot for many sellers to where they've built it up and now they're ready to go do it again. They're ready to go start something else up. So you want to take a look at these reasons why they sell and notice that none of them include declining sales or loss of key customers. The most obvious reason that people sell are the things listed. In fact, businesses with declining sales and loss of key customers, well, oftentimes they're not sellable and they end up closing down or liquidating. So it's important that as a buyer you understand the seller's motive, and a lot of times the motive is really based on their own personal situation. So the next step for both buyers and sellers is really establishing the value of a business. And the first thing that I want to make sure that is clear to both buyers and sellers, a business is worth what a buyer sees value in. And let me give you an example. If you were to buy a business as an individual, you might be looking at it from strictly a cash flow method. How much money can I make from this business? And then the question becomes, well, if I can make $100,000 from this business and it costs me $200,000, well, what if I can make $100,000 from this business and only cost me $150,000? You're comparing the cash flow of each business, or how much money you can make. We often call this the seller's benefit or adjusted net. And that's the income-based method or discounted cash flow method. Now, that's one method, and that's one type of buyer, and we typically call that buyer a financial buyer. That buyer typically pays you the lowest price, and that's okay because they're looking at strictly cash flow. The second type of buyer is often a strategic buyer, and this type of buyer is looking at, if I buy that business, how will it add to what I'm already doing? And I'll give you a quick example. We have a manufacturing company with specific contracts to purchase equipment at certain prices from certain vendors. That business is priced at $700,000. We recently had a buyer who, through the evaluation, realized if he could get access to those contracts, he would save $1 million a year. So the business is priced at $700,000. Our buyer would gladly pay $700,000 to save $1 million. That's a strategic buyer, and they tend to pay more than our financial buyers do. So when we look at a business's value, we look at it from a financial perspective and we look at it from a strategic perspective. As a business broker, I want to look at your business from a strategic perspective and find you the highest buyer and the best quality buyer. Now that takes more marketing, and not all brokers are capable or want to take that much time. Many will throw it up on a listing and hope the right buyer calls. Well, having run a marketing company, a multi-million-dollar marketing company, I understand marketing takes work, and we work very hard to find strategic buyers, which is what we were able to do with that online printing company. We found a strategic buyer who gladly paid full price cash and closed in under 30 days. But that's because our marketing targeted that buyer. So it's important as a buyer, as a sellers, you understand how values are. So this is how one business could be worth $200,000 to one buyer and $700,000 to another buyer. It's all based on the value, the type of valuation that's being done and what the buyer sees as value. Now the last method is an asset method, and really that's the replacement cost. A lot of times the asset method is used in businesses that are struggling financially or that does not have cash flow. Maybe they're negative, or they're a startup, or they're in a dying industry. So then we'll sell it off as an asset sale, asset only sale, and that's really the replacement cost. What would it cost to replace this type of business? So we want to make sure that you do understand that. Now, in our market method, that's usually a multiplier of the cash flow, or what we call adjusted net or seller's discretionary earnings. And those multipliers can either be applied to the EBITDA or the seller's discretionary earnings. Those are two different numbers, and those are basically both calculations of a profit. And that number ranges from 1 to 3 for the seller's discretionary earnings and 4 to 6 typically on EBITDA. EBITDA is typically used on larger companies, say over 4, 5, 6 million in sales. And then, of course, the seller's discretionary earnings is usually used on Main Street businesses, which is typically under 4 million in revenue. So there's several different ways. Now, an appraiser typically gets behind the numbers and will provide a range. It is not an exact science, but certainly an analysis. Now, many times sellers think that when a buyer's coming, they're going to bring all cash. And sometimes buyers think, well, I'm just going to go to the bank and get a loan to buy this business. Both are false assumptions. Banks today are very restrictive in who they lend to for businesses. And let me explain. The business has to qualify for lending. And many of you might have purchased a home, so I'm going to use a home example. When you went to purchase your home, they did an appraisal, and the house had to appraise for a specific value in order for the bank to support that loan. Well, the same is true with a business. A business has to have a certain value for a bank to lend on it. They don't lend on all businesses. And just like in buying a house, the buyer must qualify for the lending as well. A specific credit score, they have to have certain assets, they have to have certain criteria met, such as experience. There's a lot of combinations here, and because of those combinations getting more stringent over the last several years, it's certainly not as easy as it was in 2006 or 2007 to get bank lending. The most common form of bank lending for businesses is the SBA loans, and there are two flavors. There's a 7A, which is loaned on businesses only without real estate, and then there's a 504, which is loaned on businesses with real estate. Now, typically in an SBA loan, the SBA lender is going to provide 80% of funding, the seller is going to hold 10%, and the buyer is going to provide 10% to the table. These can often take 60 to 90 days or longer to close, depending on the paperwork process. It is extensively paperwork rich to get bank lending. And here's the interesting thing, it's not available to all businesses and all buyers. So the most common way that businesses are financed is through seller financing. And I know as a seller, there's always a concern of, ooh, but what if the buyer doesn't pay me? Well, if you're acting as a bank, which you are in this case, you're going to do full credential background checks on the buyer. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. If you're going to act like a bank, you're going to charge an interest rate, you're going to have the loan payable, you're going to have a set of paperwork guaranteeing all this. There's a whole lot of protections that are written in by your attorney when you do seller financing. And many times, when you've completely researched the buyer and the buyer is well qualified, there's low to little risk in seller financing. And keep in mind, some businesses, this is the only way they're going to sell, because there are some industries that they are simply not financeable. One of the industries is restaurants. They are very, very difficult to get financed through traditional banks. In fact, many of the SBA programs won't support restaurants unless they're in a franchise or have specific criteria. Now, interestingly enough, for a seller, if you're offering significant seller financing, you can ask a higher price because now you've become the bank. So there's some pros and cons here for the seller as well as for the buyer. Now, let's talk about looking at finding buyers, because this is one of the areas that we get contacted on a regular basis, and many people think brokers just find buyers. We actually do a whole lot more than that. There are certainly buyers out there that will contact us for every single deal we list. You got to watch out for them. Every day they're calling me about whatever new listing we have. We don't think they're ever going to purchase. In fact, a small percentage of buyers actually make the purchase. So that is one of our primary duties, is to qualify them, to find out if they have the right stuff for your business. And as I mentioned, there's really three kinds of buyers. We talked about individuals, and these are usually financial buyers. It could be employees or an ESOP. We've talked about corporate buyers, and this is usually your strategic buyers. It could be competitors, suppliers, or even customers. And lastly, there's private investment groups. These are both formal and informal. And they're usually more into the strategic, because they usually have a large plan that they're going after, and they create add-on businesses. So they're more in the strategic. Now, we go after buyers in many different ways, from telephone to letter to email to internet marketing. We use a lot of guerrilla marketing where necessary. We search out and profile your exact buyer to find the right buyer for a business. Now, as a buyer, we're going to ask you a lot of questions. We want to find out what's important to you. And if we look at the process, once the buyer has contacted us, we provide a confidentiality agreement. And that confidentiality agreement simply states that the buyer is not going to disclose the information provided to them to any other parties. And this is done because confidentiality is absolutely critical in the sale of a business. We recently had a bar who was getting ready to be sold, and the buyer was so excited they told their sister up in Indiana. Well, the sister didn't know that it was under confidentiality. The sister told the neighbor, thinking, who's going to know anyone in Florida? Well, the neighbor's daughter happened to work at UNF, and by the way, she also worked at this restaurant as well, and it got back to the employees, and about half the employees left. They were very loyal to the owner, and they felt if the owner was leaving, they were leaving, and the business ended up not getting sold, but instead shutting down. So it's very important that we keep everything highly confidential, whether you're a buyer or a seller, and who we tell. It really should be limited to only the people that absolutely must know and who have signed confidentiality agreements. And of course, your advisors. Lastly, once a buyer has received a confidentiality agreement and agreed with those terms, then we provide a confidential summary for the buyer to review. And so let's talk about how we evaluate buyers and looking at what a buyer is a good fit. Now, a lot of times if we're talking a corporate buyer, we're going to be looking at cultural fit. If we're doing a merger, and the number one reason that mergers fail is a corporate mismatch. And large companies, many of them still do their deals by the numbers and hope for the best. But as a seller, if you can get bank references, business references, and as a buyer, if you can demonstrate not only your financial capabilities, but your cultural capabilities, this will ensure that there's a better fit. And be willing to say no to a deal. Sometimes we get stuck in we got to do this, and we forget about the fit. And certainly as a seller, many times they want their business to continue. It was their baby. So it's important that we do look at that. Now, of course, some of the other things that a buyer will get evaluated on is integrity. Do they say what they said they were going to do? Are they someone that the seller can trust? Because if the seller is going to offer seller financing, the seller wants to know that this buyer is going to pay them, that they're going to be honest and reputable, that they're not going to try to cheat them in some way. So it's important that integrity is of the highest level when we're working in a sale such as this. And of course, buyers, as you look at businesses, you're going to be asked to prove your financial capability. This is very normal. In fact, any business over $500,000, we automatically require a financial profile, because our sellers will sometimes not even allow us to release information unless we have your financial profile. They want a limited number of people receiving specific information about their business for sale to ensure the confidentiality. So be prepared for that. This is very, very normal. Now, buyers, once you've been profiled and it looks like a good fit and the seller agrees, then you're often going to receive an offering memorandum. And this is the narrative about the business. It offers the complete disclosure so you can see the ins and the outs of the business. Often negative items are disclosed here and they are covered during this so that you know what you're looking at. Of course, any tax or contract issues are often highlighted, and deal structuring is often discussed in there as well. This is usually prepared and usually can take many, many hours from a broker, depending on the size of the business, somewhere between 30 and 50 hours to put this document together. There's usually comparative historical financials. Sometimes there's forecasted financials. Often there's a synopsis of contracts, leases, any lawsuits. And for that reason, it really is only given to a few prospective buyers. So as a buyer, you don't want to feel offended or put off if the seller is not willing to share this information, because it is very, very personal. And certainly you don't want to feel offended if financials are requested, because not only are if they request your financials, you're going to get to see all of their business financials as well. This really is an open book opportunity. So, and again, for sellers, I don't want you to stress, because the offering memorandum is only given to a few people that have been approved. Now, let's talk about the use of a broker for selling, especially with a business owner. A business owner is an expert at running the business, but may not be as knowledgeable about the selling process. An intermediary can assist the business owner to reach their goal of a successful transaction. And they do this by being a trained facilitator. See, procrastination and delays are critical factors when structuring a deal. Therefore, a business broker will continually move the process forward with qualified buyers, financing resources, ancillary associations such as CPAs and attorneys. And a business broker is in a better position to perform this function than the owner, because he or she is focused on the life cycle of the deal. The owner needs to be focused on operating a profitable business. I recently worked with a company where the owner was a large manufacturing company, very, very large deal, and they got enamored with the fact that they were getting an offer. The offer got accepted, they were in due diligence, and the owner got so excited about all these documents and everything and all the millions he was going to cash out on, he took his eye off the business. 10 months later, due diligence failed, the business had declined in sales, and the owner had over $750,000 of cost associated with that due diligence. The business ended up going bankrupt. As the owner, your most important job that you can do is run the business. Let the broker facilitate the rest. You need to have that business in the best shape it's ever been. When a buyer puts in the offer, they want to see that that business continues to grow up until the point at which they buy it. If the offer comes in, the agreement or the LOI comes in, letter of intent, and the business declines, you may have a buyer that backs out. So it's important to stay focused on the essentials of the business. Now, of course, brokers are skilled negotiators. We sell businesses for a living. Our emotions are very low, but for you as a seller, your emotions could be very high. This may be your baby. You may have had this business. You may have started it from the ground up. And see, as an intermediary, we act on behalf of the owner and establish a strong negotiating position without compromising the goodwill and relationship between the principal parties. And an intermediary will increase the opportunity to receive the best price for the business. Now, we also have transfer resources. As a business broker, we're skilled in the profession of transferring businesses, and we have many established relationships that can help to complete this transfer in a timely fashion. And of course, confidentiality. If you're marketing your business, it could very easily leak that it's for sale. It's harder to keep it confidential when you're in the middle of taking seller calls on a daily basis, answering questions, sending out information. It's very, very difficult to keep that confidential and away from your employees. So that's where a broker comes in. We can insulate that and only provide you with the specific buyers that are serious and pre-qualified, limiting the amount of time that you require access to. We require access to you, and limiting the number of people that come through the door that could tip off anybody that your business is for sale. And of course, we're business advisors. That's what we do. We provide the business owner with strategic information regarding market timing, market conditions, market price, financing options, structuring the transaction, and other information that's advantageous that you might not even be thinking about. We leverage our time and not yours to be able to increase the sales price. And here's the interesting part. We get paid only a success fee when the business sells. Now, that's the advantages of using a business broker. The disadvantages is there's a fee to having those benefits. And that's the only disadvantage. Now, as a buyer, it's even more interesting. We provide you the facilitation process, the negotiation, the transfer, the advisor, especially if your seller does not have a broker working with them. It could almost be to the blind leading the blind, trying to figure out how to sell this business. But the number one reason that if you're a buyer, you should be looking to create a relationship with a broker is protection from fraud. And I'll tell you a quick story. I recently had a deal where I was working with the owner, and he decided that he wanted to work directly with the buyer. He did not want the broker involved, and he worked directly with the buyer. The buyer agreed to not work with a broker, and they did the deal on their own. Interestingly enough, the buyer, without having bought businesses before, didn't know what she was getting into, went to closing, did all the transaction, and the closing attorney forgot to check for any UCC liens. Now, if you're not familiar, UCC lien is a lien by a vendor placed on the equipment being sold. She not only purchased the assets of the business, she also purchased a $55,000 lien. She now has $55,000 of liens that she has to pay because she now owns those liens as well as the business that she purchased. And that all could have been prevented had she used it and leveraged a broker. Now, of course, the seller didn't want the broker involved because he knew this. He knew if we had taken it through our process, we would have found those liens and the deal would have died. So be very cautious as a buyer if a seller does not want a broker involved. Usually that's an indicator that there may be something there that you're not currently aware of. Now, of course, as a broker, we can widen the search. Oftentimes, we have what's called pocket listings, which are listings of business owners that are getting ready to sell that we haven't listed yet. And sometimes we even have insight to businesses that are preparing to sell, and you could be the first buyer there. So we've got more search capabilities. And most of the time, in many cases, if the business is listed, we get paid from the seller. So there's no cost to a buyer. Now, I will mention here in the Jacksonville area, we do offer customized buyer searches. So if you know you're looking for a specific type of business, such as, say, a medical device business, and it could be anywhere in the United States, we would do that search for you. And for a small fee, we would work with the marketing search and go ahead and locate the business that you're looking for, whether it's listed or not. With my expertise in marketing, I'm probably one of the few brokers here in Jacksonville that could do something like that for you and identify the correct business. Now, common mistakes that sellers make when looking to sell their business is, we've talked about this already, is neglecting to run the business. The second biggest mistake is the selling price being too high. I understand when you've built something from the ground up, it has more value to you because you know that inside and out. You may have lived, breathed, been that business for 10, 15, 20 years. But ultimately, a business is worth what a buyer is willing to pay. And of course, if we can find a strategic buyer, they'll pay a little bit more. If we find a financial buyer, they'll pay a little bit less. But a business is worth what a buyer is willing to pay. And of course, we've got databases, some of the largest databases in the United States to review comparables. We can tell you what businesses have been sold for in the entire area. We can do tons of research. And sometimes people say, well, my business is very special. Well, I understand that, but your buyers are looking at various types of businesses like yours, so that's what we have to compare the business to. Now, of course, another common mistake a seller makes is that I got a call from a guy who wants to buy my business, and they negotiate with only one buyer. When you have only one buyer on the hook, what they have the ability to do is drag it out because there's no competition. Ideally, as a broker, we want 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 buyers fighting over your business, and we're going to do the best that we can to attract those buyers so that you've got choices. And when we do that, we increase your selling price as well. Now, of course, being a nitpicky negotiator, you want to consider if you really want to exit the business, be willing to negotiate reasonably with a buyer. And of course, be flexible. Not every buyer is going to run your business like you do, and not every buyer is going to see the complete value of your business the way you do. They may value something else in your business differently. And lastly is not evaluating the buyer. I've seen many, many times where a seller takes the first offer, walks away, and then later finds out they left thousands, sometimes even tens of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars on the table because they didn't search for the right buyer, but they took the first buyer. Now, a common mistake that buyers make is they overlook cultural conflicts. And I'm going to take this one step further. If you're an individual buyer, you overlook personal conflicts. And what I mean by that is sometimes people run only by the numbers. And they go, wow, this business is doing $200,000 of seller benefit. Oh, I can make a ton of money. But what they don't look at is they're an operations person. And the seller is a marketing person. And you bring the operations person into a marketing role and the business loses money because it's not a good fit. Or the new buyer can't bring the same skills to the table and the business struggles. So it's important that as a buyer, you recognize what skills do you bring to the table. What is it that you could bring to this business to make it better? And if you can't bring anything to the business to make it better, I want you to seriously consider whether that's the right business for you. You have skills, you have contacts, you have talents, you have abilities. What are those, and what type of business could you apply that to make the business better? And that's your ideal fit. Now, of course, buyers who do incomplete due diligence, and I told you a story about my lady who did that purchase without us, and she didn't have her attorney do a UCC lien search. That was incomplete due diligence. I also recently talked to a flooring company that instead of doing an asset sale, they did a stock sale, and a stock sale is where you buy one company and take both the liabilities and the assets. Normally, the way we sell a business is an asset sale. What that means is the current company remains, but you form a new company, and that new company takes over the assets of the former company. So you start a new name, you have to create a new DBA, but the benefit of doing an asset sale is you do not inherit any of the liabilities of the former company. Well, I had a flooring company, lack of knowledge, he bought via a stock sale this company. Little did he know the seller was hiding a $100,000 line of credit that was nowhere to be seen until about 6 months after the sale. He inherited it and ended up having to go bankrupt and lose all his money. So it is important as a buyer, if you're not in the business of buying businesses every single day, that you do employ help with your advisors, CPAs, attorneys, and brokers. Now, another 2 common mistakes are the got to do this deal. That you fall in love. I have a friend from Delaware who's looking to buy a dance company. He has seen 0 financials, has done 0 research on cash flow, and has already agreed to pay $90,000 cash for the business. He has fallen in love with the idea of owning a dance studio. And once you fall in love, it's very, very difficult to talk logic. So get your numbers, make sure the numbers make sense. If the business is worth $80,000 to pay $90,000 isn't bad. But if the business is worth $10,000 to pay $90,000, it's a real issue. So you want to make sure that your numbers make sense. Now, of course, the last mistake is overpaying. is not knowing what it's worth and paying too much or assuming debt. Now, buyer's due diligence, this is the period typically in buying a small business. We typically start with a contract and then go into due diligence after the contract is approved. Now, in larger deals such as mergers and acquisitions, sometimes there's going to be a letter of intent. The letter of intent goes into due diligence, and then do the contract right before the closing. There are two different ways. We typically do it with a contract because these are smaller deals, and then go into due diligence. Due diligence is the time when we verify the information you've been provided. This is typically a review of tax returns, possibly bank statements, vehicle titles, sales tax verification, employee tax verification. During this period, buyers, you want to bring in your experienced advisors. They can bring calm and judgment to this process, because this process certainly can be very chaotic, and you don't want inexperienced advisors. So if you're bringing on your accountant and your attorney, ask them how many other business transactions they've done. Make sure they're experienced in this area, because certainly they can send this, they can really kill your deal if you're not careful. And sellers, make sure to instruct your CPA and attorney to openly interact with the buyer's advisors. Any holding back or having to check with you will only arise suspicion when the mission of due diligence is to remove suspicion. Now, the buyer's greatest fear is, what is the seller not telling me? It's tough for a seller to prove a negative except by maintaining an attitude of open disclosure. And sellers remaining with the business and seller notes also help address this fear. Now, the seller's greatest fear is rejection and criticism of how they've been running the business. So as you're doing due diligence, remember, you're verifying the information you've been shared, and certainly you, as a buyer, you can keep a list of the things you might do differently. Now, let's talk about confidentiality for a moment. It is very hard to maintain during due diligence. You may have a lot of people involved. You may get so excited you start talking to some people, but this is the time that we really need to keep it under wraps. And for that reason, oftentimes we like to keep our due diligence to a shorter period so that we don't breach that confidentiality. And it's after the document review is done that typically contacting of suppliers, customers, and bankers is permitted. And the only reason we say permitted is that we certainly don't want to breach the confidentiality to where the deal dies completely. And of course, in all of this, honesty truly is the best policy. You want to be open on both sides, both buyers and sellers. Now, in negotiating and closing, we say negotiating starts at the first meeting, in the sense that you want to understand what it is you're purchasing. And sellers, you should really be prepared for these three buyer questions. And buyers, these are really three questions that you should be jotting down to ask the sellers. What differentiates your company is the first one. What would you do to grow the company if you were to stay on is the second one. And third, what would you do if the company received a windfall of cash? And from these three questions as a buyer, you can get a lot of information about the business that you're currently evaluating and see if it makes sense. Now, once the closing is done, there are a few things, few left open areas, and of course that's your indemnifications, responsibilities and warranties from the seller's perspective. There are certain things that the buyer may be asking for to make sure that everything is as expected. You may have earnouts, and an earnout is in some areas where you've got a fast-growing company, you may set the sale price based on a future expectations of revenue, and the earnout is then money to be paid based on future revenues. Of course, there may be escrows and offsets. And during this post-closing is when this buyer and seller works together. During this time, you want to play nice. This is when you're going to have to transfer phone lines. You're going to do introductions to employees. You're going to do introductions to key customers, introductions to vendors. You really want to extend each other courtesies to help make this transaction as easy and painless as possible for both parties. Now, whether you're considering buying or selling, why should you use Kimberly Deas and William Yankee for Murphy Business? The first reason is we provide a high level of professionalism. We both come from multi-million-dollar businesses. We both understand the business process extraordinarily well. And not only that, Murphy provides us a network of brokers literally across the United States and Canada to help us to find your ideal buyers, as well as, if you're a buyer, to find you the perfect listing. We are extremely responsive. Oftentimes you're going to get a call back that same day, if not back a call back within minutes of your call. We believe to be responsive in order to help us get your deals closed and make sure things go properly. We're going to respond to you in a timely fashion. Also, we're experienced. We've closed deals. We understand what it takes. Last year there was over 990 businesses sold and 880 brokers. So why choose a broker that doesn't close deals? And lastly, you get 2 for 1. Bill and I work together as one broker, meaning you pay one commission, but you've got 2 of us. Bill and I are both adamant networkers. He networks all over Jacksonville. You'll pretty much find me anywhere online. In fact, that's probably where most of you found me, from an email, a LinkedIn account, a Facebook account, a Twitter account, maybe Pinterest. You might find me just about anywhere online. So you really get more by working with us than any other broker you're going to find. A very rare combination. So what are your next steps? If you're a seller, I would highly recommend, or a buyer, highly recommend getting in touch with us. Our website's there, our email's there, our phone number's there. Feel free to call us with your questions. If there's something we can do to help you, consider us your business transfer experts. Now, if you're a seller, feel free, if you're looking for more information and maybe starting that process, to download our free report. You can go ahead and type in that URL and go right there. As a buyer, if you'd like to go ahead and start your search for looking for businesses, we make this very easy for you. On our website, we have a list of all the businesses for sale in the entire state of Florida and Georgia area. In fact, one of the largest MLS services in the entire world. You've got access to, and we make it very easy for you. When you search on the business, if you like the business, you hit the button at the top that says create the non-disclosure. From that non-disclosure, you'll be able to go ahead and sign that, get that to us, and we'll be able to get you the information that you're looking for and make sure that that we have a good match. And of course, if you have any questions, you can email us, you can call us. You're more than welcome to contact us. We are the champions of small business in Jacksonville, and we are the business transfer experts from your area. So at